Hey everybody, welcome to the short live. This is Dale from Polytech. Thanks for everybody for joining on with me. I do appreciate it as you're listening to this important conversation today that I think needs to be brought up. And I want to talk about the elected officials that we have in office right now that are older that seem to be going through a cognitive decline over time. Now, the right, particularly the Trump administration or the Trump campaign at the time, was addressing issues that they thought were happening with Joe Biden while he was in office. They were claiming that he had dementia, that he was forgetting things. They were calling him Sleepy Joe, and all of these things to sort of disconnect him from the ability to effectively run an effective administration while he was in office. So now it flips just a little bit. And since Trump is back in office, it's come back to haunt him quite a bit. Now, we all remember Trump's very long speeches, both when he was running for office and now that he is in office as he speaks publicly. He talked about his ability to weave words and subjects back and forth. And it sounds like it makes no sense until he hits a point where he brings it all together. And then there's this light of euphoria and enlightenment that everybody's going to understand what he's talking about. He can no longer use that anymore because the more he speaks and the more these things are released, not only in his speeches, but in his posts to social media like Truth Social and X, we can see the decline that's taking place. But as a former clinician, I wanted to sort of jump into analyzing whether or not he was having some cognitive decline, whether that be dementia or just age related. I think that's important to address. So I used a piece of software that evaluates the cognitive abilities of individuals based on speech. And so we've got lots and lots of speech clips, long speeches from Trump to be able to upload to this software. And I'm just going to pull the software up because I actually have it on my phone and my laptop. So I can give you the name of this software that I use to do the evaluation. So the software is called Alto, and you can see it on my phone right here. Let me bring it up. Not sure if you're going to be able to see that. So I can log in, actually upload how many minutes or hours of voice recordings from Trump, and it will do a very significant evaluation of what, based on the speech patterns, whether or not he has dementia or it's a normal decline in cognitive ability related to age and etc. So I think you're going to find what it came out with very, very interesting. So let's watch the clip first, and then I'm going to jump into the results from that.
We're going to help the people in California. We want to have no crime. I know Gavin was here. I used to get along so great with Gavin when I was president. Gavin's a good guy. And we're going to, if he needed it, I would do it in a heartbeat. I'd love to see, we did help them a lot in Los Angeles, a lot with the early in my term when they had some problems. But we would love to do it. I would say this, if I were a Democrat governor or whatever, I would call up Trump. I'd say, come on in, make us look good. Because we're cutting crime down to nothing. And we're taking people out, career criminals, who are only going to do bad things.
Like I said, short clip and very interesting. I did run over, I think, 90 minutes of speech across this application so I could get a real accurate and reliable data back from that. And so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to read the actual report to you. So with that said, I do have it on my laptop, so I'm going to read directly from the report itself. So this is a speech pattern consistent with possible early neurocognitive decline. That's what it labeled it as it went through. And the case overviews: public figure male, late 70s, data source, multiple public speech over several years and months with increasing frequency. And the focus on this was the longitudinal changes in speech, the language and executive function of that speech and thought process. The purpose of this is a analysis of speech features commonly associated with early neurocognitive disorders, including things like dementia. So The software gives us a disclaimer, and I'm giving you the same disclaimer too. I am not a physician, I'm not a neurologist, I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatric professional. So the disclaimer says this is not a diagnosis and does not replace the clinical evaluation that would be normally put through for an individual, which would require more than this a speech analysis to be able to be confirmed diagnosis or prognosis along with whatever it may be for outcomes. So the reason for the analysis it gives, while isolated speech errors can be explained by stress, rhetorical style, repeated and worsening patterns across multiple speeches in different clinical questions. In a neurological progression over time, the key distinctions are the following: normal aging, personal traits, and early dementia and onset. This analysis assumes consistent patterns across multiple speeches, not just a single event. So I probably uploaded maybe 12 to 15 different clips of good length so I can get an accurate result for this. So observe longitudinal changes across multiple speeches. The following progressive features are noted in this case. One, increased repetitive and fixational processes, worsening topic disorganization, growing frequency of confident factual errors, decline in self-monitoring and correction, escalation of social inappropriate language, reduced ability to maintain coherent narrative arc, or otherwise the weaving that doesn't work. Clinically, this shift concerns from this type of style and is denoted as a clinical concern. So the clinical domain analysis that it does, the language and things like fluency in which he speaks. Speech remains fluent with preserved grammar and articulation. The clinical interpretation for this argues that the stage of dementia would need further evaluation to rule in or rule out Alzheimer's and dementia. So, two, preservation of fixation, key red flags that exist throughout this. Repeated phrases, metaphors reoccur across speeches, often without contextual adjustments, without elaboration on any item or subject, despite change in audience topics or the topic of the particular talk itself. So what's the clinical signification? The persistent preservation across time, strong associated with frontal lobe dysfunction and not typical in healthy aging and progression of the individual. So three, executive dysfunction and narrative collapse. So these are all the categories that it actually evaluates it on. So over time, speech shows the following: loss of beginning, middle, and ending structure. So the weave is not existent. It never has been existent. Abrupt topic switching on the whim, failure to return to the original point, and conclude with the topic he was talking about. So what is the clinical framing for this? This reflects declining executive control, core feature of early dementia, particularly frontal lobe mediated syndromes. And so that's the clinical framing for what we've gotten so far. So number four, semantic memory degradation, repeated geographical and historical inaccuracies in all of the text and voice recordings uploaded. Things like confidently stated, inconsistent and incorrect statements, and increasingly frequent misinterpretation and representation of information. So why this matters? Semantic memory is usually preserved until later in Alzheimer's disease. Early erosion suggests non-amnestic dementia pathways or mixed pathology that may be in place. So there's some disease process that is actually inherent right now within Trump. So number five, social cognitive inability or decline over time. This is the following: increased use of dominance or metaphors that are not real or made up, reduced sensitivity to audience or context, less evidence of embarrassing or self-editing. So, he's self-editing himself or he's not self-editing himself, one of those things, but it's inconsistent throughout. So the clinical relevance for this loss of social pragmatic regulation is one of the earliest signs of frontal temporal dementia and is uncommon in normal aging. So the differential diagnosis for educational purposes is not to diagnose anybody. This is what the software came up with. So early Alzheimer's disease usually begins with memory loss, speech becomes vague but structured, social norms are preserved early. The speech patterns observed is not really clinical early AD, but can be possible through a mixed and further evaluation of dementia protocols. So at this point, it could be either way. It could be an onset of dementia or it could be frontal lobe. So then it goes over the frontal lobe. So behavioral variants that go with that. So early executive dysfunction, preservations, disinhibition, and disillusion, preserved fluency, but may have mixed fluency later on as it progresses, and then reduced amount of insight. So the observed longitudinal patterns is more consistent with frontal lobe type of dementia. If the neurodegenerative process is present, the evaluation through clinical professional would need to be done to confirm this. So again, this is not a diagnosis. This is the analysis from the software itself. So what clinicians would say accurately for this? So it gives you kind of what clinicians may say. A neurologist might reasonably state when a repetitive, disorganized, and social dysregulated speech patterns are observed progressively over time, as in these recordings, they raise concern for possible early neurocognitive disorders such as frontal lobe or dementia, particularly one affecting the frontal executive networks. Formal evaluation would need to be done to further include this prognosis or this, not prognosis, but this diagnosis for the president at this time. So critical caveats that are involved with this, because I have to give these to you, or at least the software includes them in here, is a public speech is not a clinical exam. Motivation, stress, and other things may either enhance or mask dementia along with frontal lobe. So those are sort of the things that it includes into there. And then to go on a little further, and I want to make sure that everybody understands this, is that this, again, is just a software evaluation. It is fairly accurate. It's actually still under beta testing. There's a whole bunch of them out there. Some of them you can go and download and evaluate yourself if you wanted to as well, but it is not a hardcore, solid, rock hard that Trump has dementia, but he meets all of the standards and criteria that he is either early frontal or he's early dimensional with this. So, I believe in karma. And early on, when they were really attacking Joe Biden with his cognitive abilities and his decline, as they were saying, it came back to bite him. I'm wondering if he's not using the auto pen that's Trump because he's so against it that he's actually using it all of the time, right? Because he usually goes against what, he mentions something and then he actually does it to reflect what he's actually doing. The other thing is, I'm wondering about some of the decisions he's made. In some cases, when you listen to his speech, it's hard to follow, and he's so all over the place. And as we've seen through the economic forum, when he did his speech and he said, "They called me daddy," and jumped on probably about 15 or 30 different subjects. Gavin Newsom was in the audience. He talked to Gavin Newsom, came out with straight lies about how he helped California, which he didn't. So there's a lot of concern on whether or not if he really has the ability to hold the office of the United States president. And it's really questionable. It really is questionable. It's really concerning. So things like Article 25 are looking, I think, a little bit more realistic as we go along with this. And so, hey, we'll see what happens at the very end of this, but let's pay attention. Let's pay attention to what's going on. Let's pay attention to his speeches. Let's get the message out there. If you see and you're concerned with his cognitive ability, please go out there and, do your own podcast, get on top of social media, repost things in its total. Don't grab clips. And I absolutely am against this to fit a narrative, but make sure that you're reporting your postings are accurate. Again, thanks everybody. This is Dale from Polytech. I enjoyed doing this segment. I enjoy doing all of my segments. If you like what you hear, follow me on here. You can also follow me on YouTube. You can follow me on Spotify, Substack. You guys have a great weekend.